Pigs eating something dark in a charred courtyard, standing by a newly dug mass grave. A UN soldier from Morocco is choking with rage and grief. I ask him if any of the dead that the hogs were eating were children. He nods and begins to sob quietly into his face mask. And I pointed out that The Guardian, a British newspaper, quoted the UN mission which said that, quote, traditional hunters known as Dozos fought alongside Ouattra's forces and took part in killing 330 people in the western town of Duquay, and that Julan Geffa, the deputy head of the Human Rights Division of the United Nations mission in Ivory Coast, blamed at least 220 of the deaths on pro-Ouattara forces. I repeat, this massacre was not caused by Gbagbo forces, but by the Ouattara forces who had taken the town. The Gbagbo forces had left a week earlier. There they are, look at them, mutilated bodies, chewed up, burned. It's in Ouattara, a very small community in the western part of Côte d'Ivoire. I repeat, the massacre was not caused by their forces. I think we all know that. Again, I called, this is last week, for a ceasefire and no one responded, just a week ago. And on April 7th and 8th, I pointed out the United Nations and the French were bombing downtown Abidjan near the presidential palace, where hundreds of young supporters of President Gbagbo had circled the presidential palace, making a human shield from the bombing. This is what they did. All these kids, all they had were baseball bats and 2x4s in a circle surrounding the palace to protect their president, President Gbagbo, and his family of about 17 that were there, and his wife Simone. Now, you saw a minute ago in this one right here that, do you think there's anything left of those kids surrounding the palace? No, they were all mowed down. So he called for, that was on the 7th and 8th. Who knows how many of them were killed? I can't imagine any of them had lived through it. Mr. President, I've also pointed out on April 8th that there were roving death squads. There they are right there, folks. That's Ouattara people. The roving death squads who, quote, are disappearing. This is the word they use. They're disappearing supporters of President Gbagbo. That means they're killing them. I called again for an immediate ceasefire. No one responded, not our State Department, not the United Nations, certainly not the French. Mr. President, I also pointed out that I believe massive vote fraud occurred in November 28th and the election in 2010, Côte d'Ivoire presidential election between President Laurent Gbagbo and the rebel leader Alassane Ouattara from up north. That's the Muslim part of Côte d'Ivoire. I submitted evidence in 2 letters to the State Department that showed massive vote fraud allowed Ouattara to steal the election. In one instance, showed that in the first round, we would call this a primary and then a primary runoff. In the first round, in one of the 5 districts in the north, they miscounted, they tabulated them and just added 95,000 additional votes. I documented all of this. If we had 95,000 additional votes in each one of the 5 northern districts, then clearly President Gbagbo won re-election. And in another case, if you look at what they had in the primaries, what we call primaries, in the first round, President Gbagbo got thousands of votes in the northern 5 districts. And when they did the runoff, he got zero votes. That's a statistical impossibility. What did our State Department do? Nothing. I didn't receive it. I finally received a response to my 2 letters saying that they think that this is all fraudulent. They're not going to change their mind. You know, this is sub-Saharan Africa. Do they really care? I can only conclude, Mr. President, that our State Department is engaging in a whitewash of any credible investigation into my allegations. So, Madam President, I call again on the UN, French, and Ouattara forces to halt all the violence, including that being done against President Gbagbo and the First Lady. They will be held responsible if any more harm comes to them. I call for an independent investigation. This is what the Africans want, into all of the atrocities committed by all military forces involved in fighting in Côte d'Ivoire. And I call on the UN, the French, and the Ouattara forces to halt immediately the death squads roving around the streets of Abidjan, disappearing supporters of President Gbagbo. They are led. I got a call from one friend down there that I would certainly not identify. They'd murder him overnight. And he was talking about how he couldn't go out. He could see bodies, corpses in the street. This was 2 days ago. And they couldn't go out there because they had snipers and they would mow them down. They're led by soldiers of the Ouattara's rebel army, supported by the French and the United Nations, and have killed more than 400 people, in addition to perhaps the thousands killed in the bombing that we've already looked at. So right now I have several friends who give me these reports. They're saying, isn't there anything you could do now? Just if they go in now, after they've killed all these people. And I call upon, again, the United Nations, the French, which I know are not going to do it, and certainly the Ouattara rebels, and our State Department to go in and stop it. We could do it in no time at all. All this concern about Libya and all these things are going, this is just as bad. But nobody cares. Keep in mind, this is sub-Saharan Africa. So the streets are filled with the stench of rotting bodies. Mr. President, I renew my call for hearings before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee into the bombing and killings by the UN, the French, and the Ouattara rebels, and the strong evidence of massive voter fraud in the November presidential election. I appreciate Chairman John Kerry's his willingness to hold such hearings. I look forward to setting a date. The sooner, the better. I've talked to the chairman of the subcommittee, as Chairman Coons and the ranking member Isaacson, and they've agreed to have these hearings. I'm anxious to get into this so that all the world can see. Maybe we can stop this from happening again. I don't know. I also suggest that the United States step in to help and examine the possibility of seeking a place of exile for Gbagbo outside of Cote d'Ivoire. The U.S. has performed such a role before when in 1986, under the Reagan administration, Haiti's baby Doc Duvalier was sent into exile in France. So it's happened before. There's nothing wrong. The American government did this before. I'm asking them to do it again. Take these people who are being maybe murdered at this moment. We don't know. We know that they're being tortured, and allow them to go into exile. This could be an important step towards beginning a process of reconciliation that the people of Cote d'Ivoire so dearly deserve. Because this is not about the Gbagbos. It's about the modern-day return to French colonial imperialism. And this time, with the help of the United Nations, they were doing this. Here's what my concern is. Cote d'Ivoire has had a hard enough time trying to break free from the yoke of French colonialism. From the days of President Houphouët-Boigny in 1960 through Bédé in 2000, then Gbagbo when he was elected in the year 2000. Now, up to that time, the French has virtually owned all the presidents. They're all right there with France. All you have to do is go through the streets of Abidjan, what streets might be left right now. I doubt if there are many. And you'll see that that's happening. So it's not just the Gbagbos. Any president on the African continent, in sub-Saharan Africa, should know this could just as well happen to them. And their ministers and their friends. And that's what's happening right now. I'm going to show you something here that I hesitated doing, but this is the happy face of President Gbagbo. This is the face I know. This is the president who's been president since 2000, and he's gone through a lot of these same problems, but he stood up against the French and against Ouattara up in the north. Now he's been captured, and I'll show you what he looks like today. This is 3 days ago. This is today. His face is beat in from the side. He's there. He's being held on this side by someone while they're mashing his face. Then there's Simone, his wife. I happen to know her very well. Go ahead and put her picture up there. I remember we in my state of Oklahoma, she's not there anymore, but we had really a great congressman named J.C. Watts. He was an African American. I just talked to him today. He was at a hearing that I testified in today. J.C. Watts was an African American, served in the House. And when Simone came at one time, this is Simone Gbagbo, she said, would you let me try to get me introduced to J.C. Watts, Congressman Watts? I said, yeah, I'd be glad to do it. And so I didn't know why. I went over and took her to the House of Representatives. We're in the Senate. That was in the House. He was in a committee hearing. He came out, and I said, I want to introduce you to someone who is the First Lady of Cote d'Ivoire. And she put her arms around him and started crying. And he didn't know why she was crying. And she said to him, will you forgive us? And I said, forgive you for what? J.C. Watts said, because we're the ones who sold your brothers into slavery. In the United States of America, people walk around guilty, and they should, about the slavery that they had here. But in Africa, and particularly sub-Saharan Africa and West Africa, where most of the slave trade came from, such as Cote d'Ivoire, they realized that they're the ones who sold their brothers into slavery. And here's Simone begging J.C. Watts to forgive her for selling them into slavery. At the district level, she was elected a member of parliament from her district. She was the leading way for developing a center for the care for orphans in her district. At a national level, Simone Bagbo, the First Lady, nationwide program for women to get their products to the market. No name for that program is yet found, but that's what their program is. On a continental level, Organization of African First Ladies, she was ahead of it. First Ladies Against HIV/AIDS, a forum created to establish a role of the African First Ladies in dealing with HIV needs for women and children. That's who Simone is. Isn't she pretty? That was a week ago. Let's see what she looks like today. You can't see it now. They have held her and pulled her hair out by the roots. And they went out in the streets and say, this is the hair of Simone Bagbo. I don't know what else they did to her. Use your own imagination. Brutally murdered. Now, who are these people? They were the Owatra forces. And do you think we just made that up? Put the next one up. There they are. All of these are identified leaders of the Owatra forces, holding her, and see what they're doing to her, and beating her and pulling her hair out. And that's what's happening today. So I only will say, and I'll conclude with this, that our State Department's got to wake up. You can't assume that if the United Nations is doing something that it's right. And we have to understand that there is this half of a continent called sub-Saharan Africa. And those people, their lives are worth just as much as they're worth in Kosovo or Bosnia or the United States or any of the other places where we go and we try to save lives. And so again, I would say to any of our friends in any of the presidents of any of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, put that back up. What has happened right here could very well happen to the presidents or the first ladies of your countries. I want to ask three things. Number one, stop the firing that's going on right now. People are being murdered as we speak, Madam President. Stop it. We can do it. We've got the power to do it. Our State Department has to get with the United Nations and make it happen, in spite of what the French might want. And number two, send them into exile. Give them the dignity of living in someplace else in sub-Saharan Africa so that these people, so that the people of Africa will know. Can you imagine what the people of Cote d'Ivoire will be thinking and doing in the near future if they allow this to go unanswered? That's my appeal to the United States State Department, to the United Nations, and to the French. With that, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Conklin.